Hello, and a warm welcome to Reddit Echo.
There's a particular kind of silence you only find in the deep country. It's not a peaceful silence, not always. When you're surrounded by miles of wilderness, that silence becomes a canvas, and every sound, every crack of a branch paints a picture of something moving in the dark. This is a story from my childhood, a memory that has been seared into my mind, about a night when that canvas showed us something we were never meant to see. When I was about 13, my family lived on a farm in rural North Carolina. But it wasn't a farm with crops or livestock, not in the traditional sense. We lived on a pine tree harvestry, 550 acres of perfectly lined, towering longleaf pines. Our business was baling pine straw, a big commodity for landscapers. So imagine a world of endless identical trees, creating long, shadowy corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Our house was an island in the very center of this man-made forest. The house itself was a strange relic. Built in the 1930s by some eccentric dentist, it was a custom job with odd angles and peculiar features. The most dominant of these was in the living room, a massive picture window that stretched nearly 50 feet across the entire length of the wall. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room floor sat a good 6 or 7 feet off the ground. When you stood at that window, you weren't just looking at the woods. You were surveying them from a low perch, gazing out at a solid, unbroken mile of pine trees. I hated that window, especially in the winter. We'd get just enough snow to coat the ground, not a blizzard, but a thin, glittering sheet. On nights with a full moon, that snow would reflect the pale light, creating an eerie, silver-lit world. You could see the shapes of the trees for hundreds of yards, and you could watch our dogs running around in the distance. It should have been beautiful, but to me, it felt like being on a stage, with that huge, uncovered window, putting our entire lives on display for whatever was out there in the gloom. The relevant part of the story starts on a weekend like any other. I had my cousin, let's call him Jake, staying over. We were doing what bored kids in the country do. We were lobbing things into the massive stone fireplace to see what would explode, melt, or sizzle. Acorns, pine cones, a few unfortunate action figures. As the night wore on, the fire died down to a bed of glowing embers, and we built our fortress for the night, a sprawling kingdom of couch cushions and heavy wool blankets, right there in the living room, with that giant window as our unsettling backdrop. We were just settling down when we heard it. The dogs. Their barking was frantic, but it was distant, carried on the cold, still air from maybe half a mile away. I wasn't alarmed. It was a common sound. They were probably chasing off a raccoon or a possum that had wandered too close. I shrugged it off, but Jake didn't. He had gotten up to get a drink and had stopped by the window. He was just standing there, frozen, not saying a word. The silence from him was more unnerving than the barking. "What's up, man?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring, his nose almost pressed to the cold glass. "I don't know," he whispered. "I feel like I'm seeing things." That got my heart thumping. I scrambled out of my blanket fort and joined him at the window. For a few minutes, we saw nothing. Just the monochrome landscape of black trees and white snow under the moonlight. I kept badgering him. "What did you see? Was it a deer? A person?" But he just shushed me, his focus absolute. And then we both saw it. A shadow. A tall, distinctly human-shaped shadow detached itself from the trunk of one pine tree and, with a brisk, purposeful walk, moved to the next tree about 50 yards away. It wasn't a panicked run. It wasn't a leap. It was a calm, deliberate stride from one point of cover to another. It was about 100 yards out, and in the tricky moonlight, we couldn't tell if it was moving closer, or just laterally. The crazy part wasn't immediate panic. It was a slow, dawning dread. There was still that sliver of doubt, that chance our eyes were playing tricks on us in the shifting light. So, we didn't scream. We didn't run. We just kept staring, our breath fogging the glass, our hearts hammering in our chests. We should have woken my dad, but he was a certain kind of country idiot, The type who would have stomped out onto the back porch with his rifle and yelled, "Y'all best get off my property!" into the darkness. We were scared enough to agree, without saying a word, that we did not want to taunt whatever was out there. About 3 minutes later, it happened again, but this time it was closer. A good 50 feet nearer to the house. Another figure, another tree. A few swift strides, and then it was gone, absorbed back into the shadows. This became a terrifying ritual. Every few minutes, for what felt like an eternity but was probably half an hour, one of the two figures would appear, cross from one tree to another, and vanish. They were playing a game. A slow, methodical game of advance, using the perfect grid of the pines for cover. I should be clear, we had no neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was owned by a paper company, miles and miles of uncultivated wild forest. People did not just happen to be out there. If someone was on our property, a mile from the nearest road, they intended to be there. Our silent vigil continued until the pattern broke. One of the figures appeared from behind a tree, much closer now, maybe 40 yards out. But this time, it didn't move to another tree. It stopped. And then it started running. Not laterally. Not away. It was running forward. Straight toward the house. That's when we lost it. The spell of silent observation shattered. We scrambled backward, tripping over our blanket fort, and sprinted down the hall to my parents' room. We shook my half-awake father, babbling about people in the woods, about shadows running at the house. By the time we dragged his groggy, disbelieving form back into the living room, the window revealed nothing but an empty, silent landscape. The figures were gone. What followed was a frenzy of pure, primal fear. We lived in the country. We never locked our doors. That night, we sprinted through the house, turning deadbolts and latching windows. Every door was a fresh nightmare. You just knew that as soon as you reached it, a hand was going to try the knob from the other side. Thankfully, that never happened. We did a lap of the house, 50 times at least, peering into every dark corner, convinced someone had already gotten inside. We finally convinced my dad to sleep on the couch in the living room with us, his rifle leaning against the armrest. I never understood why he refused to call the police. He had that old-school, stubborn mentality. We take care of our own. Calling 911 was a sign of weakness. It simply wasn't an option. The next morning, with the sun high and bold, we went outside to investigate. And there they were. Absolutely. Footprints everywhere in the melting snow. We could trace the path from tree to tree to tree, just as we had seen. And then we found the most chilling evidence of all. A set of footprints, right at the base of the house, directly beneath the massive picture window. From my vantage point, 7 feet up, I never would have seen them. Someone had stood there, right below us, looking up. Were they watching us as we watched the woods? We never found out who they were or what they wanted. But after that night, the deep silence of the pines never felt peaceful again. It felt like it was waiting.
Don't want to lose this channel and always be up to date with new videos? Then make sure to subscribe. The story continues, and it's only getting more interesting.